is, I'm sitting here in Hyderabad, should I build for Hyderabad? Should I build for India? Should I build, of course, for global, right? I mean, I still remember one conversation with a startup when I moved back to India and I asked him, what's your market? And he said, oh, the 250 million desktops with Windows which are installed across the globe, they are my market. Very clearly, it's a little hard to address. So how do we tackle this question? Where is your market?
Great question. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer there, right? I mean, really depends on what your business is. Again, is it consumer, enterprise? I think fundamentally, I mean, all of us here are in the make in India, mold, right? So the question is, are we make in India, made for India, or made for the world? I would say there are certainly product categories where you want to cater to a local market because you have such a localized product, right? It could be language or some business process that is very specific to a country or a particular state, right? And there's a large enough addressable market, so why worry about the world? In both cases, I want to make an assertion. I think it's very important, and it sort of gets misunderstood sometimes. You need to build a world-beating product. Because if you look at make in India, made for the world, and that's sort of, what Manthan did, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, you're going to have to compete with all the global giants, the Microsofts and, the next, garage startup coming out of Silicon Valley or Boston or Israel, right? If you focus on India as a market, because India is not a walled garden, right? You'll have all the global players and startups coming in now with, cloud, SaaS, and, mobility and so on, right? So you're going to get competition if it's a large enough opportunity, right? Let me ask a question, think about who's the Facebook of India? Who's the Google of India? What about LinkedIn? Amazon? Maybe you'll say, the jury is still out there. Uber, maybe jury's out there. Very tough battle, right? So when you start building as an entrepreneur or you're midway in your journey and you need to make some choices, right? You need to make sure you're building a product that is, world beating. And that's sort of, what, in all humility, at Manthan we have tried to do, a company founded 14 years back out of Bangalore. Did literally no business in India till about 4 years back. So what our strategy was, we'll go where the market was. And data and analytics, analytics was not a fashion statement even, right, back then. And so clearly in the US, with all the data being generated there, people saw value and, there were a lot of analytics, companies beginning to emerge, and that's where Manthan started, Europe was a second geography. We tackled Southeast Asia, Singapore and so on. Now in the last 3-4 years, I mean, India is going through the roof, and we'll talk about that shortly. I mean, there's a massive, massive opportunity in India. So again, go where the market is. Very good examples, right? I mean, look at InMobi, right? In their space, they're in a very, very tough, a very competitive space, right? Up against Google, but you heard recently they've turned profitable, right? So it can be done. You can build a very scalable business if you have your business model, correct, and you go to the geography where you think there's an opportunity. There's a large enough pie and large enough pie to be had, right? So it's a complex dynamic, but need to be thought up, up front.
Interesting you brought up Manthan's example where you exclusively did business overseas and then sort of, expanded to India and potentially other markets. Let me give you some examples which started the other way, right? Local companies, companies you could relate to very early stage. One company I'd like to refer to is a guy called Vinod, runs a company, Cloud Cherry, right? Small company, helps with customer satisfaction, improves your, online response rates. They started with India, right? Got into some pretty interesting customers locally, right? Vistara, Central, very retailish brands, sold to them, sold here, then expanded, right? Now Vinod's moved to the valley, right? He did the opposite, which is he's gone there selling. Now, size-wise, a company which most of you can potentially relate to, 50, 70 employees now, Series A plus funded, and in that journey, sort of to, go global or at least go to multiple countries. Another name which sort of comes to my mind is Waymo. right? And these are companies I've worked with, and we don't have any equity investment in any of them. So I'm just sort of seen their journey, at least in the last 18 to 24 months. Yamini, runs it, and she's again started India, sold to large customers like HDFC, and that's the other thing we're going to talk about in the go-to-market section, which is how did such really, really small companies get to such very large customers? I'll reserve that discussion for a little later, but I'm sure that would be of interest to people. But from a market perspective, companies like Waymo, etc., have started here, went to Southeast Asia, sold there, selling in Middle East, and have aspirations of going beyond. So you could go either way, right? Today, SaaS is definitely a leveler and enabler, right? You talked about Zoho. Another example I'd give, a Zoho graduate is Girish, right, of Freshdesk, right? Everybody's heard about Freshdesk. So, I heard his speech at SaaSX, and he made this point about I sell in 140 countries. Clearly, he doesn't have salespeople in 140 countries. I don't think he's visited 140 countries, right? You gave the example of the Australian company. So the mechanism, the models, the technology, the payment infrastructure, the customer sat, the customer support, all these elements now exist for you to be able to go beyond borders. Now, when you go beyond borders, you need to have a visa. If I have to travel to a country, I need to have a visa. And that visa essentially means I meet the criteria to enter that country, right? Doing business in that country is going to have a certain set of criteria, and it'd be good for you to sort of understand that, build upon that, and then make sure you're really understanding the visa criteria to get into that place. The last point I'd make there is that if we've seen examples, having spent a lot of time in the consumer industry, when I observe examples of people who sort of started off here and gone global, so far, right, and I hope to be proven wrong, the examples seem very business-ish, right, very enterprise-ish. I haven't seen too many examples of companies from here going into the consumer-ish space. I would hazard a guess here that Zomato's probably done a lot better in that space, but not too many. Not to say not possible, but if I look at data, that's been the trend so far. But you could start from global, get into India. You could start from India, go global. Just be aware of the visa criteria as you go either way.
On that line, Narendra, on the visa criteria, so if you're doing business globally, definitely through SaaS, you can have a global distribution model. You need to be sure that you can service your clients well. Yep. So whether that means deployment or, solutioning around your product, right? The larger thing is you need to build some brand, to actually sell in that geography, right? Because I wouldn't say trust is an issue, but you're doing SaaS, you're holding on to some data and so on, right? So you should establish yourself in terms of marketing and sales and pre-sales in terms of a reasonable brand before you can really mine that market, I would say. Okay, so with that, Narendra, let me ask you, I think we've had some good conversation around business models, go-to-market. We'll come back to that. I think one of the biggest movements happening today is this thing called deep tech, right? People are talking about automation, they're talking about reskilling, and we'll talk about, what's sort of happening in the product arena. What are your perspectives in terms of what's really happening there when you talk about product companies? Where should people, pay attention? What does it mean?
So I think this is a very important discussion. We talked about tech as a differentiator. For companies who are in business, and for companies who are, and for most of you who are going to get into business, it's super critical to understand the impact of AI, right? I don't think any tech CEO who's given a keynote in the last 6 months to 8 months has probably not referenced AI, right? Now, let's sort of parse this through and double click this through a little bit further. Why now, right? I was joking with Atul yesterday, which is, why is the water suddenly so different this year that AI has become so popular, so cool, right? So you've got to drill this down and understand what has fueled it. I mean, when I went to college, millions of years ago, we did courses on AI. I don't know if how many people in the room know Lisp, right? LISP. right? Used to be a language to go write, a lot of AI code, right? Wrote a bunch of AI code
By the way, sorry, I've done PDP 11 as well.
oh God, okay. So we're a bunch of young dudes here, right? So AI has been around for a while. Now, what is different now is that there's about 2, 3 elements which are coming together. There's incredible amount of data being available and constantly being generated, right? No matter who you are, what you do, you are generating data for somebody else, right? And Atul is the expert on that, and he can tell you a lot more about how that data is sort of changing the world. The other element which is sort of coming together is from my previous company powering a good portion of it is compute capability, right? Computing has become really, 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 inexpensive, right? More importantly, exascale computing and is now becoming available on tap, right? If I wanted to fire off 5,000 VMs or 2,000 cores and run something, all I need is a credit card and an access to one of the cloud accounts, and I can go do it, right? So second element is just access to phenomenal amount of computing, and computing has also evolved, right? Traditional standard computing, specialized computing in the form of GPUs, even more specialized computing in the form of sort of ASICs and FPGAs, which do really, really, certain set of algorithms extremely well, right? The third element, which sort of has shaped up quite a bit, are the algorithms around AI, right? Some of these algorithms have existed, but the algorithm evolution, and you saw the graph earlier in terms of the complexity of knowledge and vision and speech and natural language processing and intelligence and emotions, all these algorithms have really, really matured. When you apply these sort of 3 environmental factors and the need and the ability for you to reach out to customers and customers' emotion, AI is definitely there, right? I mean, you're going to have to, you probably cannot ignore it. You're going to have to, figure out a way. Now, in AI, I'll just make one more point. There's sort of 2 sides to think about it. How many of you have a PhD in computer science in the room?
Don't be shy.
Right? Yeah, guessed as much. Now, oh, I saw one of them. Okay, thank you. Now, should the rest of you give up on AI and leave the room? No, right? So the point there is, you're either in the business of building AI capabilities, but you can definitely be in the business of using AI capabilities. You don't need that gentleman's intellect and intelligence and education to be able to use AI capabilities. Would you disagree, sir? Not at all, right? You can use AI capabilities today. You can embed it relatively easily into your business environments, right? Yeah. Would you?
So, yeah, very good point. So, I've spent a lot of time last couple of years thinking about this. So I'm not a PhD in computer science. I'm in the latter half, consumption of AI. I think, and I'm not trying to sound, alarmist, I think we are talking about an industrial revolution here, right? If you look at the history of computing, and you look at, the 50s, 60s, mainframes, then, personal computing come along, the internet happened, client server, mobile devices, the cloud, applications moving to the cloud, SaaS business model, and now, IoT and AI. I think AI sits right on top of all of these foundations that have evolved, right? And it's going to be massive. Automation, as we read, every day, is going to be bigger than the, sum of all of these individual movements, I think, right? And it's a logical culmination of all the data that's being generated, right? And we don't need to get into statistics there. But the point is, if you're running a product company, whatever stage you are, if you're a consumer, you're enterprise, AI has to be at the center of your strategy. Now's the time, And I've spent a lot of time, we've been doing business for, of course, a couple of years, right? It's impacting every single product space, right from, positioning yourself. Your positioning, depending on what you're building and what market you're serving and so on, right? What problem you're solving. AI should be in that in your elevator pitch. AI should be powering some part of your product. And the good thing is, like Narendra said, you don't have to build that AI. I mean, there's enough platforms there, right? I mean, Google, done some new announcements around TensorFlow. Microsoft has a bunch of things running on the cloud. AWS, IBM Watson, right? For the unstructured data, for example, right? So there's a lot happening. So on the consumption, you just have to apply your use case and see, what is the benefit, right? I'll give you an example what we're doing at Manthan. So I see AI in sort of two buckets. One is, like Narendra said, algorithms, right? So how can you make your algorithms more intelligent, more autonomous, more cognitive, if you will, right? Obviously, if you look at the analytics space, data and analytics, descriptive analytics is a table stakes game. It's done. That's why even the Gartners have evolved the definition of the magic quadrant now, right? It's getting disrupted every year. If you look at the future, prediction, forecasting, recommendation, that also I think there's been a lot of work done, very contextual to each business space and vertical, right? A lot of the action is now happening on looking in the rear view mirror. For example, an area called causality analysis. Why was sales down last week? Why did this promotion not work according to plan? Why did this particular SKU fail? Well, the reason can be a composite set of questions, right? So these are the kind of questions AI is today answering in the context of your business. So my assertion is that, AI without domain really means nothing. So you need to be clear, are you building a AI technology? Are you building a use case on top of it? Massive opportunity for the latter. Take one use case, look at what algorithms exist, what's there on the cloud. I think in 6 months you can pretty much build out a product and be the only one out there, right? I mean, that's sort of, what's happening. The second bucket, just to complete that story,